Welcome back to the Leadership Table, where we have real conversations with real leaders making a real difference. I'm your host, Dr. Kevin Hairston, and today's guest leader is one with integrity and humility in a unique space. Even inside of this small town church, we have with us today Pastor Jeremy Spence. Pastor Jeremy Spence is the senior pastor of First Baptist Church in St. Paris, Ohio, with a heart for shepherding and a mind for biblical truth. Pastor Spence is building bridges in rural ministry while staying faithful to the call of the gospel. Pastor Jeremy Spence, welcome to the Leadership Table.
Dr. Hairston, it's always a pleasure to sit down with you, whether in this format or when we can sit around a dining table of some sort, and I can glean some wisdom from you. I appreciate that introduction. I want to take you with me. How's that? You can say that wherever I go,
Hey,
and maybe somebody will.
It's the truth. It's the truth,
Oh.
and I appreciate you being here. Let me ask you, because we've talked about this several times, but for our listeners, how did you end up in St. Paris, Ohio?
Well, the Lord knows what He's doing, even when we don't. And so, about 10 years ago now, we were in a ministry context where we realized we weren't a good fit. And so, nothing against that church, hopefully nothing against me, but we felt like, you know what, if we were going to have effective and fruitful ministry, there needs to be an alignment with the church and ourselves. And so we just started praying and looking, and St. Paris happened to be open. And so it became a fit early on of a place where we could do ministry long haul. And, so the Lord kind of put it together, and we've kind of just landed here with that. So that's the short order. Long story is, I had connections with people who I've done ministry with and said, hey, what do you know? And leaning into the wisdom of others to say, is this a fit or not a fit? I had a mentor who knew the church who said, oh yeah, they will be a good fit for you. So I was able to reference check the church as they were reference checking me. And that's kind of how we all came about in 2015, started ministry here in January of 2016.
Now, you've pastored in Michigan, if I'm correct, and so your involvement in ministry inside of another state, and that led you to even being outside of the Cincinnati area in Hamilton, Ohio, working with a church that had plenty of resources and a nice sized congregation and staff. And then you end up at First Baptist in St. Paris, Ohio. Was there any major shift in terms of not just physically, but also maybe perhaps emotionally, or just some of the dynamics of small church of pastoring?
So I was associate minister in Hamilton, Ohio, where we were a large church, and I wasn't the lead pastor, and then went to Michigan for lead pastor. I think the biggest change is when you're in a small church setting, you don't have somebody who can go do those other things that the larger your church is. One of the things I remember that's different in my current context than maybe in Hamilton when I was kind of that associate role is not only did I have a lead pastor I could always pass the buck to, but we had trustees that a phone call away, they could take care of the electrical issues. I find myself now just because of situations where I got to learn the zoning codes of my current city because somebody wants to do something. I'm like, I don't even know if it's possible. And in different church settings, you pass that off to a leader and you go, you find this out for me. Now I'm it. Or one of the stranger calls I've had, small church ministry that I enjoy in lots of ways, is a church person had a toilet clog. So who do they call? Not the local plumber. They call the pastor. And they said, hey, I think I need a toilet clogged. Can you do something? And learning the dynamic of, okay, who can I call to do that? That's not my primary, but being invested in people in a level where when I was at larger church, even when we went through a transition and I was the more senior leader there, as far as tenure, no one's calling me for things like that. But that's where small church, you get to be, I think one of the biggest changes, and I enjoy it, is I get to be a community pastor as well. So I'm in a setting of 2,000 or less people. Um, and there's a way of interacting with a community that is different than when you're in a setting of 10, 15, or up to 40,000 people in your community. Um, it creates challenges, but it's a unique setting where you can see God do things that I don't think you get the opportunity in other settings.
Let me ask you this question, and I ask this to all leaders, but in particular, even faith leaders. You know, there's that debate as to whether or not leaders are born or leaders become who they are over a period of time. Do you think that First Baptist St. Paris has experienced the level of integrity of your leadership because it's evolved? Or were you just naturally born, boom, come out mom's womb as a leader?
Oh, I think that always goes to, is it the nature versus nurture? And it's always both, I think, because I think I had to, and I still have to evolve as a leader in my current context. If I just stay the person I was 10 years ago, we're going to run into some issues later on, even if I have natural abilities, because you always have to tailor it to your local context, whatever that local context is. Or in my space, I'm also a professional counselor, as you know, Dr. Harrison. I got to tailor my leadership in a counseling space to the client who's sitting across from me. I can't just assume the one who came before is the same as the person who's in front of me. And so there is some, I think, natural tendencies, but I I think as I've been in ministry longer, I think the concern I have is those of us who may have those natural tendencies, we stop growing, we stop evolving, and we lose the capability to evolve in leadership in such a way that everyone is made better instead of just, hey, this is what I know.
Well,
So
and given the fact and the nature of the community in which you shepherd, was there ever a mind frame of this is how we've always done it? I mean, we've been used to doing it this way, and this is how it's always worked for us in the past. And how did you come in with your leadership mind frame inside of an environment that may have fallen to a level of traditionalism?
oh, they were definitely traditional. One of the, and I don't mean that in style, but I came after a pastor, great guy, who had been here 20 plus years. So they knew his style, which isn't necessarily my style. And one of the beauties of the church back in 15, 16, when we were looking, is they were stable. So they were not in a free fall where we knew we had to make changes right away. But they were stable. And that was nice. But there was also this understanding I had of, they're comfortable. If we don't do anything, they will be comfortable until it's too late. And so for me, it was, I'm going to get to know these people and I'm going to let them get to know me. And I'm going to start leading by example of things are going to be different. So one of the things I think I said right at the beginning, they thought I was tongue in cheek, and I knew it was more true than not, is one of my first Sundays, I remember going, hey, I've been in, I got my stuff in. I looked around in my office, and guess what? I didn't find Pastor so and so's shoes. Okay. So I brought my own shoes, fortunately, because I didn't find that my predecessor's shoes here. So, a way of saying, hey, he didn't leave them and I'm not filling them, but we're going to go on forward and learning to lean in and letting some space go where they can start to feel comfortable while also going, hey, we're going to need to be different, not because what is old isn't good, but God is calling us to something new, and learning and being willing to walk with them long term. So one of the other things I think I did that probably saved me in many ways is there were some things I wanted to change right away as far as our service goes. And I had some leaders says, don't touch it. And so I didn't touch it. And it took maybe longer than some would like, but 5 years later, we touched it. And even just recently, with some order of service, when we do some things, I said, hey, I really would like permission, but I'm going to honor your no if you say, and I know we talked about this before, but man, we just had a service where I think we could have changed it. And I immediately had two other leaders in that room say, you know what, you're right. We want to give you the flexibility to do things the way you think the Lord wants you to do it. And I'm not okay with change most of the time, but you've taught me change is okay. And that only happened, just a couple months ago because I've been here 7, 8 years. And we've done other changes that turned out okay, where they realized it's okay that we don't do things the way they've always been done before. But that takes patience as a leader. That takes awareness as a leader, I think, to say, I got to read this room. They're not ready for that. Even if they need to, they're not ready yet. So, how do we work with what we got?
No, I think it's an interesting and it's a wonderful perspective. I mean, you're really suggesting that, hey, over time, especially as you're building relationships, that change can come. One of the things that you mentioned, and that is that not just that you're a pastor, but also a counselor. And so you are working with individuals, you're working with families. And I find it interesting only because as we talk about, mental health, especially in our society now, if we were to go back maybe 10, maybe 20 years, or even 30 years, the word mental health really wasn't a part of our conversation, especially inside of the faith community. And so, how have you made people feel comfortable, especially given the nature of the taboo of talking to a counselor? How have you embraced and made people feel comfortable that it's okay to talk with somebody, and not necessarily because I'm a pastor, but because of my counseling background?
We would probably have to have them in here, which means we wouldn't be allowed to due to confidentiality. But I think within my preaching context, because the counseling context, some of it is just when they're in need, they find the nearest one. And I happen to be one of those. But I think overall, just reminding people, when you have a physical illness of some sort, whether it's diabetes, you go to the doctor for a reason, right? And so let's take a look at your mental well-being in the same way. Within preaching, I say all the time, hey, the Holy Spirit and Jesus, in that Isaiah passage, he's called the wonderful counselor, but he also uses pretty good counselors as well to do his work of healing. And so just reminding people that it's okay. It's a part of how we've been created. And so in the clinical setting, when someone's sitting across from me, it's a whole lot of, it's okay you're here, because we all need somebody at some point in time just to help us on this journey. And so I do a lot of those things. I preach about mental health almost specifically at least once a year, but it's always going into that preaching time so that people are used to it. And I'll say things like, hey, reach out. It's okay. And if I can't be your best resource, we got to find somebody who will. And so a lot of it is a collaborative approach of, I'm not the expert, but I can help you in this. And if I can't, I will work to find that person who can. And so it's starting to just be willing to talk about it.
No,
Hey,
I think it's wonderful that you say that because even during the times in which I was pastoring, as you're talking with an individual, and based upon whatever subject matter or the depth of whatever was going on in that individual's life, I used to kind of say to myself, "Hey, this is a little bit above my pay grade, or I don't, above my security clearance." And so I used to say, "This is when." I would refer a person to a professional counselor because I felt as though there were individuals in that lane. Well, Pastor Jeremy, let me ask you this. I mean, one of the things that we talk about with mental health, and even self care and counseling, what's your perspective on even pastors having an outlet of being able to have dialogue with individuals? Again, I always think of that Tony Soprano, the idea of a mafia boss or a gangster talking with a psychiatrist. I mean, in one instance, he was apprehensive because, hey, I might actually say something that I'm not supposed to tell you. But then also this idea that the position I'm in, I'm talking with somebody who's a professional. Do you think that pastors fall into that same category of being able to find somebody that gives them an outlet in terms of being able to have dialogue?
I think we're reluctant to, because we so often we're seen as the go-to, and we do need some outlet, whether that's peer groups, clergy groups, a good friend. Um, for me, sometimes it's just other counselors, or it's being a part of groups that are not faith based, where I'm getting some of that healing sometimes on demand, and seminars I go to. I think the trap I fight against is not leaning too much into my family, my wife in particular, because we're in a small church, small town. So whatever I tell her, it it colors her. And so being willing and able to know who's my outlet outside of my current context, that I don't have to worry about what is going to be said, and learning and being aware of ourselves enough to go, it's okay for me to say, I need something here. I need to be able to go, maybe it is grabbing coffee with a colleague or a friend. Maybe it's, just being in a context where you're not on. So I have a community kind of away from my current context where when I go, they know what I do, but I'm not their person. And there's something very healing about that, where we can just let things kind of simmer down instead of boiling over. But I think as pastors, uh, we don't always give ourselves permission to, and we're afraid that if someone finds out, what does that mean, they'll think of us.
But you mentioned that the idea that there's some things that you would not share because of the context in which you guys live. How do you balance? Here's my role as a husband. Here's my role as dad. Here's my role as pastor. Here's my role as counselor. Here's my role in terms of being involved in my community. How have you been able to balance all of those different relationships?
I don't know that I have, if I'll be honest. I mean, because very rarely do I get to be just one of those roles. Um, Rarely do I get to just be. So when I go to the schools with my kids, I'm not just a dad of a baseball player. I'm a dad who 75% of the people knows is also a pastor, that 40% of those same people know I'm a counselor. So, I don't ever get to that. Or um, I'm the guy who did the funeral for their family member. And now all of a sudden they realize, oh, I know you, and you know me. So, um, what I try to do is I'm pretty honest with my kids. They know what role I'm supposed to be in, and they've gotten used to that because we've had the conversations over and over and over. But I also just try to make sure I'm dad to them when I'm dad to them. And not, hey, this isn't dad who happens to be a pastor. This is just dad. And making sure we're creating memories, sometimes away from our context because of the different hats one wears, but also letting them know that, hey guys, we're in a small town. It's great, but that means people will know who I am, and they'll probably know you only because they know who I am. But be yourself, and you have permission to be yourself, and you have permission not to be perfect.
Can you kind of describe? I mean, because when you talk about the impact that you've made on the lives within your community, I guess my thought would become, who's out there that made an impact on your life to help you become the pastor that you are, perhaps even the husband that you are, the dad? Was there any individuals who played a role in terms of helping you be the person that you are?
Oh, we could probably spend a half hour. I could tell you story after story. I will say this, and this is why I'm in the context I think I'm in pastorally. So I pastor an old church. We just celebrated 150 years. And that's because in my upbringing, the church was the church. for me. So I grew up in a single family home due to tragedy. And I remember the church being the church. So I had a youth pastor, and I still talk to him to this day, that really helped mold a lot of who I am. My uncle, who's a pastor in a different kind of context, helped to mold who I was. Youth leaders, one of my mentors in ministry, a great friend. We still text every so often. Has dedicated, I think, all my kids intentionally. Really did. But it was when the church is the church, transformation happens. When the church is the church, it doesn't just affect those in the pews, it affects those outside of the pews. And so, an old youth leader of mine, a couple ministry partners, the guy who did our premarital counseling for my wife and I, those things, that there were times at key moments they would say things, or they just showed me how ministry looks for them, and then said, go do your own ministry. You're not me, I'm not you, go be you. But that's kind of what made it. And so I look to serve a church that lets the church be the church for those who are inside and outside. And I think there's beauty when that happens in many ways.
Well, Pastor Jeremy, let me ask you this question. When you look at your own ministry, when you look at your own life and you go, hey, I recognize the season I'm in, especially as my kids are getting older, I've been married for some time, I've got some ministry mileage in terms of doing this for quite some time. What would you say to your younger self? That young guy who has aspirations of getting involved in ministry. What would you say to that guy about the journey that you've been able to be a part of thus far?
Learn to be patient with yourself on the journey. And where you want to be will not get there overnight. And continue to learn again and again and again. And also be careful that you don't work too hard and too much. One of the beauties, I think, now of being a dad is they become my good excuse to say no. When before kids, it's hard to say no when you really don't have anything else on the calendar, and there's not, I mean, because what else are you going to do? Nothing was the answer most of the time. But now they give me that space and that freedom to say no, because I'm going to be dad. And I've yet to find many people who get upset with me because I'm going to be dad. And those that do, I've had to learn to be okay with going, then you're not the people I'm going to minister wholeheartedly to anyways, because you can't respect that I'm going to be dad first. And I don't know where I learned it. And this was a nugget I learned from somebody. And I was always honest with every church I kind of interviewed with and that's one of the reasons I have a degree in counseling and not just other degrees, is I told God, and I've told others, if my family ever resent God solely because I'm a pastor, I'm out. Because their faith in who Jesus is more important than what I do in a church. And I'm not sure where I learned that. I know somebody had to tell me, because I don't think I'd get it on my own, knowing my personality. But I said, if it's the sole reason why they don't want to be a part of a church because I'm a pastor, their faith is too important for me to do this. I'll go do anything else. I'll flip hamburgers, because I can minister to people flipping hamburgers as well as I can in a pulpit. And so I think reminding myself at a young age, that's important. It's important that you learn to say the no's now so that you feel comfortable enough saying them later.
No, Pastor Jeremy, I appreciate, man, your words of wisdom. I appreciate your leadership nuggets that you have shared today. And for all of those who are listening and watching the leadership table, Pastor Jeremy, we say thank you for your commitment and your faithfulness. Let me remind you that in a world chasing platforms and cities, Pastor Jeremy Spence reminds us that faithful leadership in the quiet places is just as powerful. Thank you for joining us. For those of you who are watching the leadership table, until the next time, keep the faith.
Boxland Media. Think big.